The National Museum of Funeral History presents The Final Curtain Never Closes. I'm your host, Genevieve Keeney Vasquez, the president and CEO of the museum. Today I have a special guest with me, Don Winsett, who's a strategy consultant and executive coach. But I know him for his previous work with the Davey Tree Expert Company. Don, welcome and good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a few years. We've kind of talked about it a couple of times and weren't able to ever put it together. So I'm excited to be able to share some experiences about landscaping, and a passion that I have is taking care of beautiful parks and cemeteries across the United States.
Yeah, and I think that's, one subject that I really haven't been able to bring to the podcast, and I think it's pretty important, but at the same time fascinating, is the work that goes into caring for a cemetery. People may not understand that, but, we're talking about acres and acres of land that have headstones of different varieties. And of course, we always want to make sure the grass is growing. So what does it take to take care of the land there at the cemetery and keep it pristine looking?
Well, this is cliche, but it's a team. It's not an individual. One person can kind of oversee what's going on, but it's a team of professionals that come in and take a look at the cemetery and say, okay, what can we do there? There's areas, as we all know, that aren't nearly as populated or not nearly used as much. And then there's some areas of the cemetery that somebody is there every single day. So you have to take a look at what's priority, what kind of time you have to spend on it, and then go from there. But it's not just cutting grass. It's not just weed whacking. It's not just edging. It's plant health care. It's tree health care. It's erosion. It's infestation of both bugs and diseases and all this sort of stuff that happens anywhere. But in a cemetery, it could become a hazard. So it's something that you have to watch very, very carefully, because you serve the public. And when the public is there, you have to take that extra care of caution to make sure that they're safe. And sometimes you can't even see it. We've taken care of some of the most magnificent parks across the United States. There is a constant looking at trees. Trees are your biggest damage. As you can tell, in any sort of storm situation across the United States, what causes most injuries and death? It's usually trees. They used to fall in a house, or they fall in a car, and it's usually where nobody had a clue that it was going to happen. And sometimes it's because the integrity of the tree has failed some way, somehow, either through diseases or through lack of care or just a big windstorm that's come through. So that's what a real, true landscape maintenance company does, is looks at every single thing. They look from irrigation all the way through to tree care.
Wow. And I know a lot of times, when people go into a cemetery and they're looking for a plot of land for their final resting place, some people will tend to gravitate towards the trees and say, I want to be buried under a tree. What is the desire to be under a tree versus the challenges that maybe the cemetery workers face in actually placing someone under a tree?
Well, there's a lot of things. One is the root system, because once you dig, obviously, for the burial, you could then mess with the root system and destroy the integrity of the tree without even knowing it. So a lot of times they've got to be pre-done, and then the root system can grow around. But that's number one. But number two is people love being around trees because the shade and the comfort factor, and just wanting to go there and be able to enjoy the time and not have the amount of heat that could be coming onto you, but also the fact that, there is the possibility of some sort of damage that could be done. But trees are probably the single biggest thing that people notice when they walk into a cemetery or drive into a cemetery.
Are trees an issue within the cemetery because of the rooting system? Like maybe 10 or 15 years down the road, when that tree begins to mature and really take root, do you find that the trees have to be maintained for any type of damage they cause to the caskets that are buried below it or around it?
Not so much that. It's the fact that they aren't maintained sometimes because people have this false sense of security that trees can maintain themselves, that they just take care of themselves, right? So, well, they live in the forest, and nobody trims them in the forest, but that's a total different environment. They can fall in a forest and they're not going to hurt anything. So if you're in a public facility or a public park and it hasn't been maintained and there was a split in the tree and nobody knows it, it doesn't take much for that tree to fall. And what happens when it falls? It could fall on a headstone. It could fall on a memorial. It could fall on a person. I mean, those are the type of things that have to be done. So some of these larger cemeteries that have multi-thousands of trees, we've dealt with, parks across the United States that might have anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 trees. That's a lot to look at on a regular basis. So they have full-time arborists, or they hire somebody like us to come in and do an inventory and take a look at it. And then we give them an idea of what needs to be done. Because there is no longer, well, I didn't know that. You can't say that anymore. You have to know what's on your property.
Yeah. So for people that don't understand what perpetual care is, can you go a little more into depth on that?
Well, it's just continual care. You cannot leave or abandon a cemetery. It has to be continually maintained. So there's money that's put aside all the time, which each, when there's a cost, when someone buys a plot, there's a certain percentage that's put away, and then that money's invested. And once that money is invested, they're able to use that investment to take care of the property. And that's what it's done. So it's a continuing maintenance.
I've worked with a couple of cemeteries around here in Houston that unfortunately never had perpetual care implemented within it. So these are like the old abandoned cemeteries where they're basically relying on volunteers to help upkeep. One of the infamous cemeteries is Olivewood Cemetery off of I-10 here in Houston. And, people may or may not realize how fast vegetation grows, because I helped in the beginning of a project for a summer where they were getting volunteers to help come in and take down the grass, cut down the weeds, trim down the trees. And, within weeks, they're back doing it all over again. It's a never ending cycle. And I think once you get to a point where the vegetation outgrows the amount of time that you have to keep it maintained, then you start having overgrowth and issues start to become greater than one can handle.
And I would say that there's a big percentage of operators that don't understand that. And they don't understand that it takes a continual maintenance. Oh, well, we took care of that 6 months ago. Well, 6 months ago, it probably looked really good. And it's probably in really bad shape right now. I've seen some incredible cemeteries where areas probably don't get viewed very often. Nobody visits very often, and they've completely lost sections of the cemetery and don't even realize it until they go there and they go, oh. And then they have to go in and do a major deal to clean it out. And then that's where damage is caused. That's where plant material can eat at headstones. They can split them. And so that's not right. That's not the right way to do it. So it's an education as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting to know that vegetation is strong enough to split a headstone. Vegetation is also responsible for, headstones no longer being able to maintain that upright position. Is that also a service that you guys provide in headstone, or is that completely a different company, different organization that handles the headstones when vegetation's involved?
Well, first of all, Davey would come in and clean it out, but then you would have to have, an engineer come in and level it out, because you have to take the headstones, they have to dig it out, level it, and reset it. Give you an example. Arlington has to reset their headstones every 8 years.
Wow, I never knew that. So if it's every 8 years, how long do you think it takes them to get, let's say, from one end of the cemetery to the other?
Well, they do like 100 acres a year.
Oh, wow.
So they have a plan. And the reason for that is because there's only one way that you can cut in a military cemetery. You have to go in the lines. Well, it creates ruts. Well, when those ruts, the ground becomes not as solid, so they start to tilt. That becomes a damage. That's where people trip. That's where people can hurt an ankle. That's where a headstone could fall on a small child. So they go in, they completely strip anywhere from 80 to 100 acres. Then they come in, they completely reset the headstones, then they put new sod, and then they move to the next. So it's just a continual cycle. Obviously, that's an extreme, but that's the way it should be done.
Gosh. And again, I mean, this just comes from my own ignorance. And I've been to Arlington National Cemetery several times. I hope also one day to be there in my demise, being a veteran myself. But I'd never, like you said, people think, oh, I did it. It's done. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I really, truly thought that was the same way with Arlington National Cemetery. The headstone is there. It's always pristine. I never realized that they had this constant, perpetual caring going on there. That's a revolving door. It's like, you just like you said, every 8 years a headstone gets changed out.
Well, it doesn't get changed out; it gets leveled.
Leveled. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Truly, truly amazing, because our ground shifts all the time beneath us, right? Ground is forever changing.
When you have these large moors that are cutting and vibrating and everything else that's going on, it just creates an unstable condition. And it's nothing wrong. It's nothing bad. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just one of the ways that you have to take care of it. Now, most of your major cemeteries that have a large amount of trees, they come in and do a full-blown tree inventory, and that gives them a blueprint of what needs to be done. So these larger cemeteries that have these trees, that have a lot of public viewing, you're talking about, Cave Hill in Louisville, Kentucky, where Muhammad Ali is. Well, there's thousands of people a week that go there just because of him. And there's many of those. So you have to make sure that those trees are maintained at a level that's safe for everybody.
That's another thing that they don't think about either, too, is traffic, right? The people coming in, like you say, when you have a famous person in that cemetery, you're going to have more people coming in to visit that. And so whatever path they choose to get to that famous person's grave has to also be, maybe reinforced, right, or looked at for maybe a different path to get there so they don't create damage to other people's headstones and stuff like that. Is that also something you guys would address? A proper traffic control, if you will, on the grounds for somebody's cemetery or somebody's gravesite that's going to be visited quite prominently?
Well, most of the time, the park or the cemetery pretty much has a plan on what they do, and they paint the path that they want you to take. So it's like, here's the sign, here's where so-and-so is, and it's usually a one-way because you don't want people going against each other, right? So there is a traffic control that goes along with that. But, the thing that I think I wanted to also address is how important beautiful maintenance and beautiful landscaping is to the healing process for people. Because when you go there, you want to be in a comfortable, completely relaxed zone. So you don't want to worry about hearing a chainsaw going off or whatever, those type of things. You want to be able to go there and relax, and you want to be able to see the grass that's completely maintained. We've all got people that are buried in cemeteries. And so I know that when I go and visit some of my loved ones, I just want to sit, right? I just want to enjoy the environment and enjoy the moment. And I think that's how important the healing process is for landscape in a cemetery. Because if you go there and there's grass on a headstone, or there's weeds growing through, or there's a tree that you think, ooh, that looks like it's going to fall. Is that what you want to be thinking about? No. You want to go there in remembrance of the person that's there.
Exactly. Because it is like a park, a place of reflection, a place of serenity.
Right.
So you kind of always want to maintain that. And I think, so are you saying like the maintenance crew has like specific hours that they can and cannot maintain the property or do their work because you're trying to be mindful of the visitors that are coming to sit and be with their deceased loved ones?
Every cemetery has a map, right, of zones and areas and that sort of thing. And this area doesn't get visited very often. So, you can go there at certain times or almost any time. But there's also services that are going on. There's also special events that are going on. So each day you get a map and you get a detailed schedule of what's going on at the cemetery that day. So you kind of plan out because best laid plans, things can change because you might have a service that just popped up and it's got to be taken care of, but you have to have alternative plans. There's a lot of coordination between the operator of the cemetery and the landscape operator as well. Those two have to work together to make sure it's all done smooth. And now that one of the nice things is now that battery power is starting to come into the cemetery landscape world, it's a lot quieter. So, blowers aren't nearly as loud, chainsaws aren't nearly as loud, hedge trimmers aren't nearly as loud, and that's such a comfort factor.
Yeah, truly. Again, just the things I truly, and I'm in the industry, and those are just things that I have never thought about. I find this to be so interesting to know that there's so much planning, and you always have to have plan A, B, and C. Right. I'm thinking that, okay, I'm going to, on Monday, I've got to start at one end of the cemetery. By Friday, I have completely gone through the entire cemetery. But that's not so because there is a funeral, like you say, that's happening. A burial is happening within the cemetery. What you thought you could do on Wednesday, you now have to reschedule that and perhaps do it on Friday, which I find
you have to have backup plans.
Yeah.
To be able to do that.
Wow.
So you have to have this flexibility to be able to work with the cemetery and their schedule as well. Because it's not your schedule, it's their schedule.
Yes, truly. Oh, wow. Again, things that we never even think about. That is fascinating. So another thing that I know that I've always thought of is the placement of ornamentation and flowers at the cemetery. I know some cemeteries they said, okay, you're going to lay your flowers and ornamentation, let's say on Monday, and by Wednesday of the next week, if it's something you want to keep, you have to come and recollect it. Otherwise, it'll get discarded.
Correct.
Can you speak more about the importance of people laying things of sediments of being there, their visitorship, and the challenges you guys face in upkeeping the cemetery?
Well, if people just lay stuff on the ground, it just is impossible to take care of. It's because it gets blown all over. So the best thing that people can do is buy the standards where you can put flowers in and it can stand. So if you have a headstone that has, two stands where flowers can sit in. And I know this sounds a little maybe negative in some way, but I think plastic is fine, because it's a continuing color. Because when you use live flowers, they only last a certain period of time, and especially in the north. They get cold and, they get ugly really fast. So that's why they say, okay, they usually let you keep about a week or 10 days. Then that's usually when the cycle's got to go through and people got to cut.
So if I put down artificial or plastic flowers, they don't have to maybe maintain that week-long requirement. They can stay longer as long as they're in a container.
Yeah, if you have a container on the side or something like that, I've seen a lot more freedom. And then also, too, planting permanent type, greenery as well, a holly bush or some sort of evergreen, bush or something like that. Now, obviously, the cemetery will charge you to maintain it, but at least there's something there all the time. And that's something that the landscape crew would do as well.
Oh, that's good. You never think about all of the the trouble that sometimes leaving that stuff behind can create. Even though it's beautiful. And I know sometimes like there's certain customs and religions, cultures they have like a large amount of items they bring out, especially, the Latin American Hispanic culture. They'll practically, outline the entire perimeter of the burial site and then adorn it with a lot of trinkets and pinwheels, flowers and lights and stuffed animals. So how do you address that type of...
That's usually the rule of the cemetery. We follow the rule of the cemetery.
Okay.
And they tell us what needs to be done. And they'll say, okay, on Tuesday, everything has to be removed. But think about that. That's a whole nother level of work that someone has to come in and take care of. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it adds more maintenance onto taking care of the cemetery.
Yeah, that's, again, another level of things that you got to work into that perpetual care of the cemetery, that I think if people can have a more profound respect of incorporating the perpetual care into their loved one's burial spot, it's there for an eternity and the grounds will forever be kept. My mind is blown because every time I go to a cemetery, it's just always beautiful. And I never think about what it takes. Yeah. You think it's just a mower cutting the grass, but it's just, there's so much more than just a lawnmower.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then irrigation. Let's talk about that. Irrigation. How do you properly irrigate the cemetery? Is it an in-ground irrigation or is it above ground irrigation?
It's according to both. Now, if it's an older cemetery, it's probably above ground. Newer cemeteries, they are now putting in irrigation systems. I mean, water is such a valuable commodity now, especially obviously in California and the West. It's something that's extremely important. So using natural grasses now, using natural materials is much more important. So again, it's another education of bringing in a landscaper that knows the zones and they know what you should be using, to take care of the plant material. So trying to use natural grasses and natural material from that area is so much better.
Now that I'm starting to think about everything, you see all this beauty above ground, but there's so much going on beneath the ground, right? There's the do the headstones just sit directly on the ground, or are they buried pretty much? And is there a section that's actually buried into the ground?
Yeah, there's a section that's buried into the ground. There's a concrete slab that it sits on and gives it a levelness. So
we have underneath the ground stabilization for the headstones. We have the hole that we dug for the burial vault and the casket and the coffin and the loved one that's inside.
Correct.
Then we have the irrigation lines that are going throughout the ground.
Right.
And then we have the tree roots doing things their own way, right? So that's a lot going on underground that you kind of have to be mindful of when you're upkeeping the cemetery. Every cemetery has their own guidelines, their own rules, and the guidelines and the rules that govern whether they're required to have a graveliner, which is basically a concrete container that outlines the casket itself, that helps to maintain the integrity of the ground, so that as time passes, people may not realize that when you're buried 6 feet under, then you've got a good, 4 or 5 feet of earth that is sitting on top of you, which has a lot of weight to it. And eventually the integrity of the burial container will implode when exposed to the elements in the ground, which can lead to that caved in appearance at the ground level, right, that we see where the grass grows. So to help maintain that look of the implosion, some cemeteries will request that a graveliner be put in play, and therefore the casket will not implode and all of the earth is sitting on top of the concrete box, basically.
That seems to be the dominant feature that I've always seen.
So a lot of the cemeteries you work with then do have the graveliners in play.
Yeah.
And that also helps with the tree root system as well, correct?
Correct.
Because then the tree root system can't penetrate the concrete as easy, or
they'll go around.
Yeah, they'll grow around. Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, I have to say, I have learned a lot about the Davey tree, other than just being the people that come out and mow.
Right.
There's so much more, and the fact that you maintain the trees and the health of the trees. But you since have retired from that.
Correct.
And you're now doing strategy consultant and executive coaching. I find that also very fascinating. So can you tell me a little bit more about what you're doing nowadays?
I'm working with people in the death care industry. I fell in love with the death care industry about 18 years ago. I started working with it here in Florida. Nobody walks in and says, I'm going to work in the death care industry. It just sort of happens. And when you start to realize how you're helping people, that's where the joy for me came through. And then I just happened to be in landscape, which is one of the biggest cost items, for a cemetery. So I got to see the positives of it. And I also got to see a lot of great companies working in the death care industry. And I made a lot of friends. So when I retired, a few people asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm probably going to help Davey a little bit longer. But after that, I'm probably going to do some consulting. And so I had several people come up to me and ask me to help get them exposed into the death care industry. So I've done some time just introducing people into this amazing industry and being able to expand other people's visions of how to create opportunities of a great products that they have. So that's what I've been doing. And I'm trying to advise people on how to do landscaping properly, just like what we're talking about here, how to look at things. I don't have any skin in the game anymore, so it's not like I'm trying to sell them anything. I'm just trying to give them the wisdom that I've had over the last 18 years. And it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're basically helping businesses who want to work in the death care industry or be a resource or a support system in the death care industry. You help them get into it, basically.
And especially with the large amount of consolidators that are out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
Probably buying a lot of cemeteries, and they don't know what they bought. They know what they bought as far as business is concerned, and they know how many calls they're getting a day or a month or whatever, but there's a maintenance item that goes along with it. So I'm trying to help people understand the maintenance that goes along with that and how to be able to take care of it. And so that's been a lot of fun as well. And we'll see where that goes, but I'm trying to raise the level of professionalism up and not just say, okay, we're just going to cut. Well, that's not right,
Yeah, there's so much more that needs to be done. So, and like you said, when you go into a business, of course, when you're looking to buy a business, whether it's the funeral home, it's the cemetery, sometimes it's both, you always want to look at what revenues it's generating. But it's also important to understand the expenses that are associated, the overhead that goes into it, maintenance being one of those overheads, and what that's going to take to maintain that cemetery for the entire year.
And one of the things I've seen that doesn't work very well is they try to piece this out. Okay, well, we're going to give somebody cutting the grass, then we're going to give somebody taking care of the trees, or we're going to give somebody just doing the irrigation. No, you need to have one quality company do it all so that there is no finger pointing and that people take ownership and they say, okay, I'm going to make this look really good. That's how Davey became so successful, is because they said, if we don't do it all, it's not going to work for us. And so when we do it all, or when Davey does it all, it's very successful.
That's very, I think, very important because, when I'm managing the museum, which I'm also managing the grounds that the museum is on, there are certain elements that you're right. I resource them out to different, depending upon what it is, whether it's repair for irrigation or cutting down a tree or thinning out one of my trees and then cutting the lawn. You're right. I do have to make multiple phone calls in order to get the work done that needs to be done. But I can see true value in having all your resources coming from the exact same company, because then it would save me time too, because I wouldn't have to make the multiple phone calls. The company would come out and say, hey, you need this tree needs to be looked at, or we need to thin this tree out, or it's getting close to the line, we need to cut it back. And you would already take the initiative to do what needs to be done, rather than me finding it and then getting somebody to come and fix it.
Yep. And then, like I said, it's an ownership thing. Good quality companies want to take ownership of it because they're proud, and they're proud of the facility. And anybody would love to be able to say, to put your museum on their resume and say, look what we do. Here's an example. We take care of everything. So that's the right way to do it. Not everybody's able to do it, but that's the right way to do it.
And then you said not everyone's able to do it. Why do you think they wouldn't be able to do it? Is it because of the cost, or is it because that type of resource isn't available in their area?
Both.
Okay.
It might be that they find that it's just a little bit too costly to go with one company to do everything. But I find that saving you 2 phone calls, a complaint, how do you put a value on that?
Yeah, that's what I looked at it as. I was like, well, my time is just as valuable. Exactly. My time is money as well. And if I'm having to be mindful of the trees on my property that I'm responsible for, I have to do a walkthrough at least once a week and make sure that everything is the way it should be. I mean, since I've been at the museum, I have to say we probably have removed about 5 or 6 trees every time we have a storm. Something happens to another tree, and we, have to I have to call in the tree company to come in and take it down, so that I'm not liable for that tree falling on somebody.
Exactly.
So, yeah, because at the end of the day, whoever is maintaining the property is liable.
Right. And like I said before, you can no longer say, well, I didn't know that. You need to know that. It's your property.
Yes, but if I had a company like you,
right,
like the Davey Tree Company, or a company that you're helping to get into the death care business, is it safe to say then that they take on that liability?
Oh yeah, that's their job.
If I go into contract with them to do all of the services, they also take the liability along with it.
Right, but you have to give them accessibility to be able to get the work done.
Yeah, so again, that's, I think, a very valuable point. There's value to be said in 1, you don't have to make the multiple phone calls. 2, you're saving time. And 3, the liability is shifted now. It's not on you to be worried about that tree that got struck by lightning 2 weeks ago in a storm.
Right, and somebody will say, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know there was a storm there. Well, if you're there every week, something happened, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's your responsibility to cover the grounds and take a look. Right. Yeah, exactly. Wow. Well, this has been so educational and so eye-opening for me. I have a much better respect for the groundskeepers and the companies that come in and take care of the cemeteries. And I'd say, Dawn, I've become a great friend of yours over the years, and it's just been wonderful every time I get to run into you. And it's been a true honor to have you on my podcast to help educate people about the importance of cemetery care.
Well, I really do appreciate it. And, as you know me for a few years, I just like to help. And whatever I can do to help is something that's very important to me. I had one time somebody asked me, says, what gets you up in the morning? I said, what gets me up in the morning is how can I help someone? And they go, well, how does that make you money? And I says, well, it doesn't always make me money, but it always makes me feel good.
That's what's important. Yes. So if I wanted to know more information on how maybe to get in touch with you, because I'm a business, I want to get into the death care industry. I want to utilize some of your services that you're working with now. How would I go about getting a hold of you if I'm listening to this podcast?
You would just get a hold of me either through my cell phone, which is 954-303-3333, or Don Winsett at winsettconsulting.com.
Great. And I'll try and see if we can get some of that information put into a link also so that people can find you and you could be another resource, and
I'd love to be
you
able
can
to,
continue to help people, that which you love to do every day.
I'd love to be able to connect people. And, a lot of times I just connect people and walk away, and
That's awesome.
that's what you do.
Well, Don, again, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate having you today. And it's been fabulous and eye-opening. And I hope that you're able to connect more people and continue your mission.
Thank you. And I'm sure I will.
Thank you for joining me today on this podcast. And I hope that you will share this episode with family and friends. We look forward to any feedback you have to offer by giving us a review on Apple or Spotify. And always remember, any day above ground is a good one.